Welcome to this week's episode of Critically Speaking, where we explore issues at the intersection of science and society, issues central to individual and societal health and well-being. I'm your host, Therese Marco. Most of us are familiar with the ocean because of trips to the beach, cruises, or movies. The same ocean where pirates operate in Somalia and where plastics are accumulating at an astonishing speed. And of course, people realize that the fish and other seafood they eat comes from the ocean. But minimal to people's awareness of the horrors that occur between the time their fish and calamari were living in the sea and the moment it arrives on their plates. The sequence is actually pretty complex, but it has enormous implications both for the environment and for human rights. And insufficient journalistic coverage has contributed to our lack of awareness of these issues. Some of the most vivid coverage, though, of the human and environmental aspects of what goes on at sea has come from today's guest, Ian Urbina, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter at the New York Times, but his pieces also have appeared in the New Yorker magazine and the Atlantic Monthly. But beyond these contributions are his award-winning book, a bestseller, The Outlaw Ocean, and his nonprofit organization of the same name. Ian has spearheaded an effort through more extensive journalistic coverage across a range of media formats in order to generate greater awareness and hopefully mitigation of some of the horrors we'll discuss today. We've got the opportunity to talk with him about exactly what happens between the time an animal's in the ocean and their consumption later. And we'll also find out why he chose the term the Outlaw Ocean to represent his work. Ian Urbina, welcome to Critically Speaking.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us, why the title, The Outlaw Ocean?
You know, one of the ambitions of the original reporting was to try to help the public reimagine the space. So first of all, to offer a sense of its vast scope, you know, the 2/3 of the planet that's water, but also to rewire their outlook so that they didn't just think of that space as journalistically an environmental story, but rather as a booming workplace where more than 50 million people work. And then lastly, to really emphasize the point that because of its vastness and because of other reasons, one of the threads that characterizes the space anthropologically is that much of the behavior out there is at minimum extra legal. It operates very much outside the law. Even if there are laws, which there often aren't, written, the enforcement of those laws is anemic at best. And the reality that occurs, therefore, is a lot of extra legal behavior. And that's why we chose the Outlaw Ocean.
Okay. So your investigations and your series in the New York Times covered actually a wide array of really dreadful happenings, both in and upon the oceans, things that were certainly unknown to me before I saw your articles. And I encourage listeners to read your book as it really builds on that material. But today, I'd like to focus on fishing as well as the fish. There are two components, and one being the environmental devastation from illegal and overfishing, and the other being the human activities and human abuses associated with bringing fish and other seafood to market. And you yourself actually went out there and witnessed what was going on. So the demand for seafood has increased over the last decades, partly because people are counseled by their doctors to avoid red meat, but partly also because cattle production is associated with an increase in greenhouse gases. And so by eating more fish and less beef, many people feel they're doing their part to help the environment. But the costs of the increased seafood consumption are actually much higher than you'd imagine. So are there particular countries where the demand for seafood is extremely high?
Yeah, I mean, Asia generally still leads the planet when it comes to per capita consumption. Japan, China foremost, South Korea, Taiwan secondly. But the US and Europe are rapidly catching up for the reasons that you cited.
Yeah. And so then the fish and the other
seafood, the other animals that people are eating, do they mainly come from local fishermen on the shores of these countries? And if not, how's the demand being met?
So 50% of global seafood consumption comes by way of something called aquaculture or fish farming. And so while half of global consumption is still wild caught, meaning, fishing boats far from shore typically, and within that half, some of that is artisanal or local level, catching and selling. The fastest growing portion, and right now, right at the 50% mark, is this alternate way of producing seafood for human consumption. And that's by raising the fish either in on land, kind of earthen swimming pools, if you will, these big dugout pools, or near shore nets or pens. And both of those forms of fishing are more culture than capture. In other words, they raise them for consumption rather than go out and hunt them.
Okay. And what about the others, the other 50% that are being hunted? What goes on there? Are they just from the shores of those countries or?
Not typically. Again, by weight, the vast majority of the fish that humans eat is coming off of industrial, commercial fleets. And so those are not near shore, quite especially in the last couple of decades, as many near shore fish stocks have collapsed because of overfishing and climate change. Now, large industrial vessels are going further from shore. And I don't know the exact proportion or part of the 50% that's wild caught, but it's more than half of that is coming off of commercial industrial boats.
Wow. And are there laws that dictate where these commercial vessels may or may not engage in fishing?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to think of the seas, as you well know, but your audience might not, that it's important to think of the seascape in bifurcated fashion. So there's national waters or nearshore waters, and that's typically defined as up to 200 miles from shore. And then from a fishing perspective, the high seas or international waters typically start at the 201 mile mark. And more fishing is occurring on the high seas for various reasons, one of which is that the regulation and government oversight of that territory is much less. There is a patchwork of regulatory bodies that are usually they don't have the force of law, but these are called regional fisheries management associations, RFMOs, or regional fishery management organizations, and they usually have a swath of the ocean that is under their jurisdiction. And if you want to fish there, you're supposed to get a license from that body to be there. But it's very partial. If you're not a member of that RFMO, then there's really no obligation to get a license to be there. And then furthermore, the body itself typically is one species. So there might be a tuna RFMO or a squid RFMO, but they're not for an entire region and all biodiversity within that region.
Okay. So these groups that are, for lack of a better term, policing these areas, are they international bodies, or are they from the countries that are close by? Because it seems like there'd be some sort of geopolitical boundaries, even if it's far out in the ocean, no?
Yeah, I mean, so the RFMOs are international bodies that sort of hold meetings, and different participants and signatories, members of that body will then make their case for catch quotas. China, Norway, or the US will lobby for a higher number of fish type X, tuna or what have you, cod. Now, in national waters, it's a whole different situation. Those are governed by the country whose waters those are that they belong to, and they vary in terms of how those are governed. But the core problem in both realms is that as good as those rules might be or not, the enforcement typically is really problematic, because most nations have, if they ever had navies or coast guards, they've pulled back in their size, or they don't exist anymore at all. And even when they do exist, an individual nation's navy doesn't really have clear jurisdiction to enforce laws on the high seas, because those are international waters that belong to no one and everyone. So for lots of complicated reasons, enforcement is the big weak link in the whole governance chain.
Right. And I imagine for people to get these licenses to fish, I mean, maybe a lot of these commercial fishing, industrial fishing outfits don't even get the license. They just do it.
Right. There tends to be two scenarios. One is a nefarious operator of a vessel or a fleet will head to some place where they can get away with fishing illegally because they know that they're not going to get caught. And if by unfortunate luck, a patrol comes near, as is sometimes the case near the Falkland Islands or Argentinian coast, there have been repeated instances there where Chinese vessels have been very far into illegal zones in national waters. And when they're approached, they just flee and they make a run for the high seas. And, they might get chased. They may even get fired upon, but rarely is there much more that can be done. And once that vessel flees the territory and makes it to the high seas, usually national authorities stop at the line. That's one scenario. The other scenario is, vessels do get a license, but they engage in other types of illegality. So they're allowed to be there, but they use nets that are too fine mesh, and they're scooping up lots of juvenile fish and collapsing the stock because they shouldn't be doing that. Or they're doing other sorts of crimes, or taking more fish than they're allowed to take. There are lots of other forms of illegality that are beyond just the licensing issue.
Right. Is the illegal fishing of this type that you just mentioned, or extra legal, does that tend to be conducted more by particular countries, or is everybody doing it?
It's hard to say, right? Because on the one hand, you might look to China, right? Because China has, by a couple of different research organizations, been ranked as the national player that is the worst purveyor of illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. On the other hand, China has a much bigger fleet than everyone on the planet, the next two biggest fleets combined, especially its distant water fleet. And so it's just a bigger presence. And it's also dealing with, it's a more aggressive maritime player in many ways. So when it comes to illegal encroachments, my experience is that it's very often Taiwanese and Chinese vessels that are more aggressively out there. They're feeding a much bigger market. They have a much hungrier and larger population. Seafood is a huge factor in their diet in a way that it's not as much for other countries. So for all those reasons, China is really a fleet that many ocean conservationists look to when it comes to these concerns.
And so are they mainly fishing, China and Taiwan? Are they mainly doing this like in the South China Sea and kind of close to home, or how far do they go?
Yeah, China's everywhere. I mean, China, you'll find, and we boarded ships off the coast of Gambia, Chinese vessels in Gambian waters near West African coast. I've reported on ships when I was down at sea near Antarctica and near the Argentinian and Chilean coastline, the Chinese squid, a portion of the Chinese squid fleet on an annual basis. About 350 ships head near the Falkland Islands and then head over the Galapagos Islands near Ecuador. You'll find China certainly in the South China Sea, but you'll also find them near Indonesian waters. You'll find them, everywhere you might go, there likely to be some sort of Chinese ships there.
Wow. But 350 off the coast of South America looking for squid. That seems an incredible amount of ships. So, okay, can you tell the audience something about the consequences of overfishing? Because it's really more than just the fish disappearing.
I mean, there's a lot of science about the oceans as one of the more, if not most important variables in the climate crisis, and sort of the health of the oceans, which includes the biodiversity in the oceans, be it coral or seaweed or the fish pyramid, kind of the stabilized predator-prey relationships within the biodiversity of marine life. Without those things healthy, the oceans become unhealthy, things fall out of whack, and the ability of the oceans to be a carbon sink in the way that they are now to a huge degree falls away very quickly. So there's a climate crisis variable here with regard to overfishing. There are human rights and labor concerns tied up in the concerns about ocean depletion and overfishing and illegal fishing, in the sense that as nearshore stocks have collapsed and the ability of local artisanal or even industrial, commercial, international boats have to go further and further from shore to catch a bare minimum to break even, that has really complicated consequences for how they can make it work. Fuel is expensive, manpower is expensive, the boats are expensive. And so you start cutting corners to make a sliver of a profit or to break even. And some of those corners are often sea slavery and using trafficked workers. So that's also tied up in the same issue. So there are a range of different other categories of, food security, global, small developing nations and their political stability becoming wobbly when you have industrial commercial fleets contributing to corruption at home and repression. So there's a lot of different ways this story has consequences beyond just the maritime or fishing world.
Right. So as the fish stocks closer to shore depleted, the fishing boats simply move out further. And I know you talk in your work about long haulers. Can you describe for the audience how long haulers operate and who's actually working on them? Because I think this starts to get into some of your human rights.
Yeah, I mean, long haul just really can be any type of boat, whether it's a longliner or it's a trawler or a purseiner or any other sort of boat that's engaged in fishing that just simply goes further away. And these boats, every country or many countries have them, right? And they're just now, you'll find, for example, Chinese and Thai vessels or South Korean vessels or Taiwanese vessels off the coast of Somalia or off the coast of Bangladesh. They're going really, really far from shore. And often because of something called transshipment, at-sea transshipment, which is this method essentially that's used in a lot of industries, but in fishing, whereby the primary harvester, if you will, in this case, the fishing boat, rather than coming all the way back to shore, to home port to unload their catch, they stay in the fishing field and they keep fishing sometimes for 2 years. And that means those workers are staying there the whole time. And they offload their catch to motherships, which are cargo vessels that come out and pick up the catch from the past, 3-4 months, and then unload fuel and parts and maybe some new men and medicine and food and whatever. They resupply. And this has been a tactic that the industry is used more and more because it's a price efficiency. It saves money, but it has real concerns about number one, the ability of governments to check on what those boats are doing becomes much tougher because the boats are staying out. And so you don't have inspectors that can get on board when the boat comes back to port because it's not coming back to port. And then the human conditions of the workers tend to be way worse on those boats that stay out longer. And then also just the ability of corporate players. I mean, remember, when it comes to trying to fix these problems, it's not just or even predominantly the responsibility of governments. It's also, and maybe even more, the responsibility of corporate players and market players, consumers like you and me, or even more big buyers, like Walmart or CP Foods or whatever. Right. And those buyers, if they're going to try to clean up their supply chain and figure out what's going on, from bait to plate, if they want to keep track of every step of the way, if there is transshipment in their supply chain, it means that they're going to have a much harder time knowing for sure that all of their actors are playing by the rules, because stuff is getting dumped onto one mothership by lots of different companies and different boats, and it's all getting mixed together. And so you can't tell the good from the bad once you have that murky link.
Wow. So the ships are out there for several years. Does that mean the people that are working on them are out there for several years?
It does, yeah. I mean, sometimes they rotate off the officers, but the crews usually are signing on to a 15, 24-month contract.
And is that lucrative for the workers?
Not typically. I mean, the maritime space, again, it's always important to be careful here. The merchant marine, so those workers who are on cargo ships, and grain ships and oil ships and the ships that carry stuff, it's a whole different universe that's largely unionized, and there are official contracts, and it's a very different nature of work. It's difficult and it has its own problems, but it's nothing like the distant water fishing fleet, even though they're both working in the same space. The distant water fishing fleet globally, again, this varies. If we're talking about the US and the UK, again, they're not without their faults, but those fleets like Bumblebee of the Sea and are often, they have more oversight on them than the fleets that are coming from many other countries. So South Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, China, Vietnam, Thailand, these places have notoriously brutal conditions on their boats. And in those cases, the workers are often paid, shocking Dickensian level wages. And often they're not paid at all. They sign on to these debt bonded kind of contracts where they owe money even before they're on board because the company paid to fly them from, a village in Indonesia all the way over to South Korea. And from there over to Uruguay, they get on a boat and they're going to be at sea from Uruguay to Cape Town fishing for tuna for 2 years straight. And even before they step on board, they're in debt to the company because the company paid for the cost of relocating them and all sorts of things. So they're really problematic work conditions and contracts.
And so there are a bunch of guys on these ships from various Southeast Asian countries. And are there medically trained people on board? Because it seems like that kind of fishing could be dangerous. You could get hurt and you could get sick when you're out there.
No. I mean, these are not, ships that tend to have even sufficient first aid kits. They certainly don't have, doctors or healthcare professionals on board. There are some variations here, so the Chinese, for example, certain types of fleets, certain types of fishing targets have different practices. So, for example, in squid and with the Chinese squid fleet, they often travel in packs, 20, 30 ships at a time, sometimes even more. And when you have huge fleets traveling together, especially from China, those fleets often have a security vessel that goes with them in case they want to flex some muscle vis-a-vis competitors or government forces. And sometimes those fleets have a medical ship that is meant to sort of look after all of the fleet. But mostly, for most types of fish, say, for example, the ships I was boarding on the coast of Gambia, all of them Chinese, those were sole operators. Those are fish that were targeting what's called forage or trash fish. It's the stuff that humans won't eat, but it gets netted up in massive tonnage, and then it gets ground and pelletized and turned into high protein pellets. And those ships don't have doctors or, sufficient living conditions.
It's this business of these people are in debt by the time they even get on the boat. It reminds me a lot of some of these B. Traven novels, in Mexico, what happened to people is terrible. In effect, they're slaves, right? And they're invisible to us. And are they disposable? What happens to them if they get really sick and they can't work?
Yeah, I mean, so the term that's often used for this form of trafficking, of human trafficking, labor trafficking, is sea slavery. And sea slavery or human trafficking at sea, labor trafficking at sea, is often a spectrum of scenario. On one end of that spectrum is the sort of debt bondage scenario. So that means, let's say on the Thai fleet, you have a Cambodian villager who gets recruited by what's called a labor broker. It's really a human trafficker. And he says, look, I can get you a job on a Thai boat. You make more than you could here in this tiny village in Cambodia. In a year, you could make in a couple months. I can sneak you into Thailand. You don't need papers. You don't need money up front. Do you want it? And that is a sort of knowing and willful participation, but it's still human trafficking because it's usually force, fraud, or coercion. Those are the three variables in the definition of trafficking. And the fraud and coercion are once that person signs on and begins making their way to the ports and across the border, they accrue debt and they become captive through financial leverage. The other scenario is the more brutal, old school kidnapping, and that's also something we've reported on. And again, not to beat up on the Thai, but that's where the Thai fleet, but that's where I've done most of this kind of reporting. And in that situation, you have Burmese. Usually, they're foreign workers, or not Thai, but they're Burmese or they're Cambodian or they're Laotian, and they're in Thailand and they're carousing at a karaoke bar, which is essentially a brothel. And next thing they know, they wake up and they're on a ship. And what's happened there is they got roofied or they got drugged. And essentially a call had been put out, say at the port, by some desperate captain who had to leave in the next 24, 48 hours and said, look, I'm short 3 guys and I need you to find me some workers fast. And so the sort of the seedier, more brutal version of labor brokers just go out and get it done this other way, which is by kidnapping people.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And then that's it for them. I mean, who even knows where they are?
Yeah, right. Some of them make it off, some of them don't. Some of them escape and drown. Some of them jump overboard and make it to shore, but they're often in some far off land where they don't speak the language. They don't know anyone. They have no idea how to get home or even who to call. There's a great doc film about this very issue called Ghost Fleet. Came out 2 years ago.
Ghost Fleet.
Yeah, it talks about these very workers that escape captivity on fishing boats, and then they end up in this case, the guy was Cambodian or Thai, and he was in Indonesia, and he was stuck there on some tiny island and had nowhere to get home, and so he started a new family, and then only years later did someone come to him and ask him, his story and help him reconcile with his family back home, who all thought he had died.
Yeah, well, he could have. It's reasonable to think that.
Yeah, on that note, I'll just mention, like in 2009, 2010, the UN did a research study of this demographic of worker, namely Cambodian deckhands on long haul fishing boats, especially in the South China Sea. And of the people they interviewed, 49% had said that they had witnessed murder of other crew on ships. 49%.
49%. That's half of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's disturbing. Okay. You recently had an article in the New Yorker, and to me, that was very, very interesting because it did show that not all fishing is directly related to human consumption. So what's going on in Gambia where you did this piece?
Yeah, so Gambia is the tiniest, the smallest nation in continental Africa, and it's on the west coast of Africa, near Senegal, Mauritania, and it has seen in the last decade this boom in the presence of foreign industrial commercial fishing boats along its shore. In the last 10 years, 14 factories have been built in those 3 countries, Mauritania, Senegal, Gambia, and these factories are all Chinese owned, and they're all for fish meal. And fish meal is this stuff that essentially is used to feed livestock, be they most often fish, livestock, so aquaculture, so tuna or shrimp, or that are raised in these huge pens. They get fed by the farmer, if you will, and that's these pellets. And the pellets are just ground up wild caught fish, a fish pulled from the ocean that have been ground up, and some vitamins added in, and that sort of thing.
They could be any kind of fish if they're turned into meal. They could just harvest everything, right?
Yeah. So the boats that focus on fish meal production are targeting what's called forage or trash fish, and they're typically trawlers, and they're typically low trawlers. So the net is low in the water column, and they're catching a lot of the smaller fish and everything, whatever, turtles, sharks that are unlucky and get caught there, but also lots of smaller stuff that doesn't get consumed typically by humans for various reasons. And so that all gets ground up and turned into these pellets. And I was just interested in looking at this for a bunch of reasons. One, it's kind of the front edge of the cutting edge that is where industrial boats are headed, because the west coast of Africa still has a fish stock that's somewhat robust and rapidly, unsustainably declining. And so it's a real magnet for big fishing companies. And then furthermore, the sort of dark irony of aquaculture and raising fish on land and in these pens was meant and supported for many years by environmentalists as a way to slow the rate of depletion of the wild fish, out there swimming freely. And, to get fewer boats out there on the water, plucking them up, they thought, let's start raising them in our own pens. And now, because those aquaculture fish are being fed pelletized wild caught fish, it's actually speeding up the rate of ocean depletion. So that sort of dark irony, something that, the general public might want to know.
Right. I think they do want to know it. And hopefully they'll listen to this so they can hear that's really, I mean, you think, well, I'm eating fish, it's really good, right? But actually it could be even worse than you think. And it is in those cases. So in Gambia and these other countries where they're putting in these big installations to produce fish meal, those companies are Chinese largely?
In that case, again, I don't want to sort of slip into some xenophobic,
no.
inadvertent. Neither do you, but yeah, I mean, the reality is, for lots of complicated reasons, one of which is the U.S. has really pulled back from Africa and Latin America in many ways. But the Chinese government has sort of been pushing something that's called the Belt and Road Initiative, which is their effort to sort of, number one, provide more readily accessible development dollars to developing nations in especially in Africa. So loans, but also infrastructure projects are a real growth opportunity for Chinese business. And indeed, they've sort of come in there really strong. And most of the major dam or bridge or road or port or fishing license projects are being pursued and landed by the Chinese more so than European or American interests. And it's not to say that the Chinese are any more nefarious in that overall endeavor. The U.S. was for forever, playing this role and engaging in a lot of the same problematic behaviors. But right now, the Chinese are the force to be reckoned with, and they're the ones building the factories.
Yeah, but there are others as well. So the factories, the fact that they're doing this, do they have an impact? This is two questions. Do they have an impact on local fishermen who, typically have been able to fish and then bring their fish home to their families or sell some in market? Are they being harmed by, this extensive effort? And then are there any things such as effluent or anything? Is there any environmental damage that comes from a fish meal plant?
Yeah, so the food security and local political stability issue here in this Gambia case is, again, kind of textbook, reminiscent of a problem we've seen play out in a lot of countries. But the way it goes in the Gambia is Gambia was coming out of a long repressive government regime in which the economy was in shambles. A newly more progressive-minded government came into power, and there was a lot of hope that this would restart the economy and get them, moving in the right direction. In come business interests that are a mixed blessing. On the one hand, the country desperately needs money to do the basic stuff, deal with COVID, build schools, fix roads, all that. And so they're looking for opportunities to get revenue that would allow them to do right by their citizens. At the same time, they being the new government, doesn't have a lot of savvy and expertise and leverage, frankly, to deal with these new kind of players that are coming in and pushing contracts. And so what happens in the case of this one industry, namely the fish meal industry, is there are promises that are made. Hey, we'll build you a new road. Hey, we'll employ this many people of this many Gambians. You can tax us on the import export. It's really going to be a boon for you. The road didn't get built. The number of jobs that were created was one fraction of what was promised. The boats that were allowed into the nearshore waters were largely being worked not by Gambians, but foreign import, cheaper labor, Senegal. And then there was the things that didn't get mentioned. Oh, by the way, when we build these factories, when you boil hundreds of tons of fish and pelletize it, it smells god awful. And, one of the few things that Gambia had that was doing okay, and it was a major source of revenue, were its beach resorts. Well, now things smell terrible and restaurants are closing, what tourists are not coming because it just is gross. So there's the hidden slow motion cost of the impact on the tourism industry, coupled with, because the government doesn't really have, for lots of reasons, corruption and lack of experience, and they're not doing their job when it comes to policing the emissions, not just the smell, but also the effluent, the water emissions coming from the plant. Well, all of a sudden, the lagoon next to the plant turns red, all the fish die, it's been polluted. They run a pipe out to the ocean instead. They start dumping the waste out there. Now you've got die-offs coming, washing ashore, whales and fish and stuff washing up. Beachgoers are saying they're getting rashes. And again, the government has very limited leverage or experience to put a halt to this. And that's really angering many of the local shop owners and young people and folks who had a real sense of faith and promise in this new government. And so they start protesting and saying, look, you guys are selling out to the Chinese and you're not protecting our interests, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden things start getting destabilized. And the old police force that used to be the thugs of the old guy that were now out of work, hopefully, because the new guys were in. Now those guys are back on the streets, visiting folks at night and arresting folks without warrants and all this sort of stuff. And so this is how development issues end up playing into political stability issues and food security issues. And then the food security, the main fish on the coast of West Africa and in Gambia in particular is something called bonga. And for years, bonga was it's like a 12-inch silvery fish, decently tasteful. And, for years, it was so plentiful that when you went to the market, you could get bonga for free, almost like an appetizer. It'd be tossed in. And then when the fish meal industry came in, they started targeting the bonga fish. And the fishermen, both the industrial boats that arrived and then also the local artisanal fishermen, the local guys, were all getting a much higher price to not give the bonga to the local market buyers and sellers, but rather to promise it to the factories. And they were making more money. And that meant that the locals were unable to access their food staple that they needed for protein. So now they were resorting to chicken imported from China. So it's just this really complicated, unfortunate downward spiral.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a few people benefited from it. The few fishermen that then could sell their bongas to the
That's right.
Chinese factories, but that's right. It's not on balance. It wasn't a huge benefit. Well, hopefully they will build some of the roads and the things that they said they would do, because it sounds pretty bad. Okay. So I get why the Outlaw Ocean is a fitting term. It's almost like anything goes, right? And nobody sees or cares much about what goes on way out there. I mean, you don't see it, right? And I think about lots of restaurant menus, where you go and the menu says something like, oh, grass-fed beef from Joe's Ranch, organic baby carrots from Mary's Farm. But with fish, it might say farm-raised or wild-caught, period, right? And so without sufficient journalistic coverage, people will never know how that fried calamari ended up as that appetizer or that salmon fillet as their entree. Nobody's going to think about the faceless humans involved in bringing that food to the table or the environmental damage that results.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I paid you to write that, to say that. I mean, it's yes, I completely agree. It's why we exist. You said it better than I could have ever said it, which is that as different from many of the concerns that we have, of which there are quite a few on land, these concerns offshore are distinct in a couple ways. One is the real anemic or outright lack of consistent journalism out there, because it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's dangerous. It's a out of sight, out of mind realm. So, and especially as journalistic outlets have pulled back on, all forms of investigative, long form, international. Well, they're certainly not going to be investing in this kind of journalism because it's the most expensive and slowest, to produce. But right. As that happens, the real world consequences are that, just as you said, the land loving public, the consumers on land have zero to little understanding of what are the issues happening.
Right. They think they're doing well by eating seafood, right? they're doing their bit for the environment and whatever. So are there are there any international bodies developing that can create regulations that might have teeth to curtail some of these issues? Is anything being done, or it just can't be because of the distance and the expense and the lack of boundaries in the international waters?
No, I mean, I think a lot's being done in lots of different directions. So, like, thinking of this monolithically is really a mistake. And I try to always avoid my reporting tipping into a catch all perception of all seafood's bad and
Right.
the entire realm out there is lawless. For me, the problems are, first of all, knowing the diversity of the problems, whether it's murder of stowaways or dumping of oil or arms trafficking or murder
Mhm.
or overfishing or plastic pollution. There's a wide variety of things out there that are going on, and the amount of progress being made or lack of it varies per silo, if you will. So I always sort of try to make sure we come back down to that level. When it comes to the specific issue of sea slavery and seafood, that one problem, that one concern, yeah, there's a lot happening. I mean, and a lot of it hopeful. There's obviously a buy local push that's happening in all, supply chains and foodie sort of movement, and you're more likely to be safer on with regard to these concerns when you're buying local from boats that are near shore, et cetera.
Right.
So that's one point. Number two, there's a growing involvement by traditional players that focused on Human Rights Watch and is more worried about things that are also happening at sea. And WWF and Oceana are also more worried not just about dolphin-free tuna and plastic pollution, but they're also thinking and talking about the humans. And that, I think, is a big step forward where you get some of the key stakeholder advocates to start working together on intersectional problems.
Right.
And again, there are also big players. I think that the least progress, just to head back to where I live, which is a dark, pessimistic place, like the least progress is being made by the market players, frankly. I think really keeping the pressure on the big buyers and sellers of seafood and telling them that they better clean up their act. And even if it means a more expensive can of tuna or shrimp or whatever, and it takes longer to get it, it's really them. It's that sector, it's those players that have the most power to change these things, even more so than governments.
Well, and maybe the people that are buying from them can hold them more accountable and put pressure on the big buyers like the Walmarts and the people that are, and say, we want to know more about where this fish came from.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's where they'll get it from, and those buyers can be you or me, or they can be, say, the U.S. government. Like the U.S. government buys more than $2 million worth of tuna a year alone just to put in public schools and on military bases. So there are massive singular buyers. The EU is a big buyer, right? And so these folks, you and I can try to adjust our habits, and that's good. That's worthy. It's symbolic to a large degree, but it's important. But big institutional buyers, Marriott hotels, or like these huge corporate buyers who can make decisions about all of the X type of seafood that they're going to get for all of their sub institutions, those folks have a lot of leverage, and they can force the big sellers to change how they do business.
So how to put the pressure on them?
The same way that folks did with bringing down apartheid and divestment and sweatshop garments and blood diamonds, and these are supply chain initiatives. They start with letter writing from average consumers. They start with investor actions from people who go to the investor meetings. They start with more journalism, quite frankly, that sort of puts it out there, and all these different, and then everyone, if you think of yourself as you're a taxpayer, you're a donor, you're a spouse or partner or parent, you're an interlocutor with other people that are close to you, you're a voter, you're lots of different things. Every individual probably has a lot of these different roles, and in each of those places you can do small things. You give to this organization because you think they're doing good stuff in this overlooked issue, or you ask this political campaign what's their stand on this and what are they doing about it, or again, there are lots of different, in all your roles, you can do things more than just try to figure out which brand of whatever to buy. there are other ways you can help. An average person can help too.
Yeah, but I think, it is such an overwhelming problem that I don't think people think about, well, it's just me. But, if there are enough people that are doing something, as you say, in one of their capacities, one of their roles, I think, a difference can be made and change can be brought about, but they have to be aware of it. And that was why I was really excited to be able to interview you today, because people listen to podcasts. They often don't read anymore, but they listen to podcasts, and hopefully they will be motivated by listening to this to buy your book, donate. Okay. So, Ian, today there was really only time to talk about several aspects of these fishing practices, and it's just a scratch on the surface of the other things that occur in your Outlaw Ocean. But in the show notes, the listeners can read and see more about Ian's projects, his investigative articles and videos, and the Outlaw Ocean Music Project, which combines the investigative reporting with music. And I can promise you that the book is gripping and eye-opening. I've donated to the project, and I hope some of you will support these activities, because together, we can make a difference. So, Ian, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for your interest in our show. If you have any questions about the topics we've covered in previous episodes, please let us know through our website, criticallyspeaking.net, and we can answer them in a subsequent episode. Also, if there are particular topics you'd like to hear more about, or for the first time, again, please send us a message through the website. And don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts, because the more ratings we receive, the more people we can reach. And please stay safe.
Critically Speaking, hosted by Dr. Therese Marco, is produced by Turnkey Podcast Productions. Music by Matthew McGaughy. Look for more episodes of Critically Speaking at iTunes, Google, or your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at CritiSpeak. That's CRITISPEAK.